being empowered with that 14 days plus 5 knowledge, I went in and did the math, and a transfer was going to fall on my mom's birthday.
Modern fertility treatments are what we sometimes call miracles of science. And listen, you're not going to meet someone more dedicated to scientific thinking than me. But sometimes in life, we need to leave room for just the miracle part. In today's story, we're going to hear from Sarah Liggett, who along with her husband, Brian, experienced infertility, fertility treatment, and all of the ups and downs of a life well lived. I'm Dan Bulger with Progyny, and this is Infertility. We have a lot to cover today, so let's dive in. Sarah and her husband, Brian, an airline pilot, met, got married, and decided not to have children right away.
When Brian and I were first married, we actually fist bumped on our wedding night to no kids, 2 years. Let's enjoy each other. Let's travel. Let's, not rush into family. We always knew we wanted a family, but we also were pretty adamant that even though we were getting married a little bit later in life, we were both 30, that we just really didn't want to immediately rush into kids. So we honored that, and I stayed on birth control for the first 2 years, and then came off birth control right around that time. But we didn't really try all that hard, only because my Brian had recently started a new job, and then myself actually ended up starting a new job kind of right at that 2-year mark, and so we weren't super focused because we just knew we had a lot kind of on our plate and going on, but we, as some would say, removed the goalie. And so we're okay if it did happen, but weren't really super focused on it right out of the gates of that 2-year mark. But 5 years later, we were both kind of scratching our heads.
So for those keeping score at home, that's 3 years of sort of casually trying with no results. Now is where I give you the standard rule of thumb for this kind of thing. If you're under 35 years old and you've been trying for a year without finding success, then it's time to visit a fertility doctor. And if you're 35 and older and trying for 6 months without success, then it's time to go get checked up. Well, Sarah and Brian had been trying for about 3 years. And while the first few years were pretty casual, Sarah told us that by the end they were starting to plan things around ovulation and taking things very seriously. But still, no success.
We finally sat down as a couple and said, hey, we have been diligently trying at this for a while with no success, and I think it's time that we maybe both explore if we're potentially having any type of fertility challenges. And so we went online and found a fertility clinic.
That's a bigger step than some realize. Seeing a fertility doctor rather than an OBGYN is a true step towards resolving infertility. OBGYNs are experts at what they do, but what they do isn't treat and diagnose infertility. Finding a fertility doctor can be intimidating to many. So here's a reminder that at Progyny, we have the best doctors in the country in our network, and you can navigate them easily using our Find a Provider tool at progyny.com/findaprovider. It took about 6 months, but Sarah and Brian got themselves an appointment at a clinic in Dallas.
It was a great experience. We went in, they kind of gave us the lay of the land of what fertility treatment was like, that they were going to, run some various tests on both Brian and I to determine our fertility viability, if you will. So I had the test done to verify that my tubes were functioning correctly, and then I didn't have anything like I'm not going to say that word correctly.
Endometriosis. That's one I can say, but the one that always gets me is laparoscopy. I might have said it right just now, but usually in conversations, I can't say it. I'm usually saying something like laparoscopy.
Did all the testing on me. I had good egg viability, good tubes. Everything was functioning. But on Brian's side, that wasn't necessarily the case. So he came back with a fairly low sperm count. Good swimmers, good heads and tails. The sperm were all good. There just weren't a lot of them. And I'll never forget our doctor. We were in the office and she was explaining the diagnosis to us. And she said, I don't handle PPs, so I'm going to need you to go to a urologist, and he'll, put a recommendation together, a treatment plan. Likely they're going to put you on some meds for about 6 months, see if they can increase the count. But I'll be honest with you, I've been down this road a lot, and I think you'll be sitting back in my office in 6 months, and we will immediately be going to IVF, not any other initial steps. And she goes, at the end of the day, my job is to try to get you pregnant as soon as possible. So I do encourage you to go to the urologist and take these actions, but I am going to make a prediction that you'll end up back here and we'll end up on the path to IVF. So go ahead and start kind of preparing your brain for that.
So the diagnosis came back and it was male infertility, more specifically a problem with low sperm count. So as you just heard, she recommended a visit with a reproductive urologist. Reproductive urology is not something we speak about a lot here on this show, and maybe that should change. There are plenty of reasons that someone might need the help of a reproductive urologist. But you don't need me to sit here and list them off for you, because today we have a reproductive urologist on our show. Let me introduce Dr. Barrett Cowan from Posterity Health. He's a reproductive urologist in the Progyny Network.
A reproductive urologist is one who focuses on male fertility issues, while a reproductive endocrinologist, or REI, focuses strictly on female fertility issues. So remember, when we check a semen analysis, there are 3 variables that we look at. The count, meaning how many sperm are present, the motility, which means how many sperm are actually swimming, and what we call the morphology, which means the size and shape of the sperm and how many of them look normal. So there can be issues with count, motility, or morphology, and many of those can be traced back to behavioral and lifestyle issues, underlying medical issues, and sometimes anatomic or genetic issues as well.
Now, we've done a Male Infertility 101 on our show before, and you can find videos with Dr. Cowan on Progyny's YouTube channel breaking this all down for you as well. So we're not going to get into the weeds right here, but I did want to ask Dr. Cowan one thing for this episode in particular. If IVF can be used in many cases as a workaround for male infertility, then are there any benefits to visiting a reproductive urologist? Why not just move ahead with IVF and ICSI?
Right. Whenever we see a patient with an infertility issue, the first question is what's causing it and what can we do to improve it? And part of that is making sure there isn't any other underlying health issues. For example, about 10% of people will actually have a significant underlying health issue. Remember, this demographic of age men 25 to 40 frequently haven't seen a physician since they saw their pediatrician. And so frequently we'll find people who have testicular or pituitary tumors or significant hormonal issues, which may be anatomic in origin. When we assess these patients, particularly those who have no sperm, a physical exam and a complete history is absolutely essential, as well as a hormonal evaluation, in addition to genetic studies. Testosterone use is another big cause of azoospermia, and in this era we see patients on a weekly basis who are on testosterone and present with azoospermia because testosterone use actually shuts down sperm production altogether.
So it's a really good idea for men with low or no sperm count to get a checkup with a reproductive urologist. Not only might they be able to enact a change that will allow you to potentially not need to utilize IVF, but perhaps even more importantly, any underlying health issues can be addressed, issues that could potentially be life-threatening. One more for Dr. Cowan before we dive back in with Sarah. Almost every one of our stories has a part where the couple went to go see a fertility doctor, and very few of them include a male going to a specialist to get evaluated. That feels weird, as infertility is a problem that impacts both partners and truly isn't a female-only issue. But it's also logistically odd. The male evaluation, after all, is significantly simpler than the female one. So we asked Dr. Cowan if he thinks more men should go get evaluated on the outset.
In general, we recommend having the male and female evaluated in combination or collaboratively, but the reality is that the male is really easy and inexpensive and non-invasive to assess. So getting the male evaluated up front is always a great idea. By simply doing a semen analysis, one can assess whether a male factor is present or not. And instead of waiting till the last minute and delaying treatment, we can start the treatment process very early on and really help couples conceive. Because remember, fertility is not a male issue, it's not a female issue, it's a couple's issue. And if we address the male factor up front, which is typically easier to do, we'll be much more successful.
Okay, so it might not require a reproductive urologist on the outset. Your fertility clinic can certainly do a semen analysis, but once those tests come back, it is a good idea to go get a workup with a reproductive urologist where indicated. So that's what Sarah and Brian did. They did the eval, put Brian on some medication, and started trying again. But unfortunately, this medication wasn't moving the needle much in terms of sperm count, so they ended up back with their reproductive endocrinologist. When it's male factor infertility, the, let's say, simpler protocols are usually not effective. So with a significantly low sperm count, you might be able to rule out timed intercourse, Clomid, even IUI. Which means that the real answer might be IVF. And that's because with IVF, an embryologist can isolate a single sperm cell and inject it directly into an egg to fertilize it. This makes sperm count kind of irrelevant. It's called ICSI, and it's been a real game changer. But of course, any process that requires something as incredible as isolating a single sperm and injecting it directly into an egg doesn't sound particularly cheap. No, ICSI is part of IVF, and IVF is very expensive. So while Sarah was mentally ready for IVF, there was some hesitation.
I was a bit cautious and knowing the costs associated. But, we were just kind of going through the motions. Let's get through this step, next step, and kind of find out where we were. But I would say that actually early on was when I uncovered and figured out about Progyny. I remember, again, distinctly sitting in our fertility doctor's office, and she told me, well, I see on your paperwork you work for AT&T. I said, yes, ma'am. I actually just recently started working there. And she said, oh, well, you're so good then. They have amazing coverage for IVF. And she didn't really expand upon that. But she really, I could just tell in her demeanor, tone, everything that she was very confident that since I was an AT&T employee, that this was going to be an easier financial journey for my husband and I. And she's definitely right.
Sarah and Brian had Progyny on their side, and suddenly the concerns just kind of melted away. Here's your reminder that you should ask your employer about their fertility coverage and benefits. They might have Progyny, and if they don't, they might consider adding it if employees are asking. We have resources available to help at progyny.com/talktohr. Sarah was excited to hear that she had great coverage, even though she wasn't exactly surprised to hear this.
I had always known that AT&T offers great benefits, and it was one of the draws to coming to the company. But she didn't really explain what Progyny was or any of those factors. I actually found out at a work conference. I was at a work conference and with another colleague out of the Colorado market, and he was just giddy excited because his wife had just become pregnant through IVF. And so I knew that I had kind of just started the journey. I think at the time we were still waiting for Brian to go through his regimen to determine, what our next steps would be. But he explained to me that, oh yeah, AT&T has an absolutely fabulous benefit for fertility, and that, most companies don't cover any costs associated with fertility services, that AT&T has an entire program. And he said, for our process, we've really only paid around $5,000 total. And that was really more inclusive of the medicines. And that almost every other part of the process had been covered within the Progyny benefit. And I was just floored because I knew how much my sister-in-law had paid. So that was really intriguing to me. And I actually remember distinctly, again, calling HR and asking a million questions and saying, would you own my first child after this is over? Am I beholden to work for you for a certain amount of years? I couldn't imagine that there wasn't going to be a catch somewhere. And there really wasn't. It was pretty amazing and definitely made, as we kind of got the final diagnosis with my husband, that, IVF really was going to be the next step. So yeah, finding out that a majority of that, extra cost was going to be not a burden that we had to take on was just, again, it just made the process so much easier for us to not have to sit down and make a huge financial decision. in order to be able to achieve our dreams of having a family.
Life-changing benefit in hand, Sarah moved forward with IVF.
For me, it was not terrible. Obviously, it's a lot of shots. My husband is actually deathly afraid of needles. He passes out. He has only ever gotten a few shots solo. He actually passed out at the dentist's office and really scared the dentist. But so we kind of knew right from the jump that I was going to be responsible for doing all of my shots. And I think we had mentally prepared for me maybe being a bit emotional or, having just being a little different, right? As you are, have different hormones and whatnot going through you. And I was really blessed. I don't think it affected me that much. I think I'm a fairly even-keeled person by nature. But, I think I was so filled with excitement of the potential of being able to have children that I didn't feel affected.
Sarah's IVF cycle went smoothly for her, and it was effective as well. She chose to use PGT-A, which is genetic testing, to test the viability of the embryos, and it turned out that she had viable embryos to transfer. Her ultimate goal is to have more than one child, and in the old days in this situation, a doctor might recommend transferring more than one embryo at a time. But with genetic testing, an embryo transfer of a healthy embryo has extremely high success rates. And due to the considerable health risks associated with multiples, health risks for both mom and babies, best practices these days is to transfer one embryo at a time. But the good news is that a frozen embryo transfer down the line for baby number 2 will carry the same success rates as this first transfer does. Yes, you'll age, but the frozen embryo that'll be transferred will be the same age and viability no matter when you choose to use it.
I remember asking her, I said, okay, well, I am 37 now, and I can imagine probably waiting a few years for the second baby. Are you going to tell me when I'm 40 that I need to put in 2 embryos because of my age? Because I can't think of anything worse than a toddler and twins. And she laughed and said, no, these embryos will forever be from a 36-year-old woman. They will forever be viable. They will forever be genetically stable. So no, if you come back to me at 42, I'm probably still going to recommend that we just put in 1 embryo. And so that comforted me a little bit. And yeah, that was our plan. Singletons.
That brings us to embryo transfer day.
It's so fast. I mean, and you think about the time you spend in egg harvest and, waiting for the DNA results to come back. The actual transfer is like 5 minutes, so quick. And I remember actually thinking my doctor was trying to give me a hint because she had music playing and My Girl was the song that was on. And so I thought, is she trying to tell me something? And then there's the waiting also after that transfer, right? The first 7 days and waiting to go back in and be tested. And actually that day came and I got to the fertility clinic, and their office was on the 9th floor of this building. And the elevator was out that day. And so I had to walk up 9 flights of steps to get upstairs to get that pregnancy test. And the doctor called me later that afternoon and said, well, at first I want to apologize for the elevator snafu today. But I can tell you it was worth it hauling up those 9 flights because we did get a strong positive pregnancy test. And I was thrilled.
Sarah and Brian had reached a milestone in their journey. After all of these years, they finally had a positive pregnancy test, and they knew that they didn't get there alone.
I can't say enough about my fertility doctor. She was fabulous. Dr. Elkins was just so cool and had great bedside manner and was so positive and upbeat and made the process feel so filled with hope. And again, we were exceptionally lucky, right? And in the speed in which everything went along, the success we had with egg harvesting and the success we had with the insemination and all of the, everything did really stay in a very positive and upbeat way. But I know that had it not, I felt in such good hands that she would have been able to carry us through that.
And sometime later, they met their baby.
So we were blessed in 2020 with a baby boy, which is actually, I have to speak to this because this is just so unique. But so yeah, we found out we were pregnant in late 2019. And then obviously 2020 was, everything that happened was certainly not on anyone's bingo card. But it was such a blessing for Brian and I because we ended up having Bowen in August. And if everybody remembers, travel was pretty much non-existent. And my husband's a pilot. And so he actually ended up on a paid leave of absence, a reduced pay, but nonetheless, he was home. And he was home pretty much from the time Bowen was born until Bowen was 9 months old. That's when he finally had to kind of go back and hit the road. And ironically for me, that actually empowered me to not spend as much time away from my job as one normally would after delivering a baby. But I'm a commissioned salesperson, and I was able to actually return to work fairly quickly, and Brian was here with me, and so everything that they'd prepped us for, as far as make sure you only put in one, we actually ended up being able to be together for almost over a year, and it lining up with having a baby was just the coolest.
The plan for the couple was always to have more than one child. And as you know, they were actually in a very good position to do so, with plenty of healthy embryos in storage. So they planned to do a transfer in January of 2022, but that's when life stepped in the way.
Unfortunately, in October of 2021, my mother was diagnosed with a very, very, very aggressive cancer. And I knew I just couldn't start the process. I needed to focus on her. And so that's what we did. We kind of just put things on pause. And again, a bit of a silver lining to, the whole IVF process is that you do have a bit of control, right? On when you proceed forward and then you don't. And so we paused, and unfortunately, as I mentioned, it was a very aggressive cancer. And she had finally gotten through all of chemo around April of 2022. And so I re-engaged with the fertility clinic and said, hey, we want to press forward. I was hopeful to give her something to be excited about, something to motivate her to, focus in on some of the rehab and things that she was going to need to do post chemo. And so we started the process, and most people don't know, or I didn't know, that they put me on a regimen of birth control for 30 days to try to get, some baseline numbers out of me for, what protocols would be best for the next transfer. And unfortunately, when I got to that appointment, that 30 days after I had started the process, we had just been informed that my mom was terminal, that she had developed leptomeningeal disease, which is basically the cancer had spread into her brain, and that we were likely going to lose her in about 2 weeks. So we continued forward with the appointment, but I went in and basically told the doctor, hey, look, because he told me my numbers looked great, everything was awesome, do I want to proceed? And I said, well, unfortunately, I don't think that I should right now. I basically have a freight train that I know is headed towards me, and I really need to pause again. And is that going to be okay? And he said, yeah, actually, everything we've done is good for 6 months. So I agree with you. I think you need to take the time, and you just let me know when you're ready to proceed. I said, okay, well, just so I know, kind of what to expect better, what's going to happen. And he said, well, I'm going to have you, when you're ready to go, I want you to call me on the first day of your cycle. And then it's basically going to be, we'll bring you back in, but if everything goes as we would anticipate, it'll be 14 days plus 5, and then we'll do your transfer. And I said, okay. So that just kind of at least gave me a time frame so that I would know, am I mentally ready, right? Am I going to be mentally ready in 14 days plus 5 to start it? And so anyway, unfortunately, as expected, we lost my mom about 2 weeks later, and we were had actually come back from her funeral, and I was expecting my period, and it didn't come, and I, like, for a brief moment thought, oh my goodness, Mother, what did you do up there? I thought I might be naturally pregnant, and but lo and behold, my cycle did start. And being empowered with that 14 days plus 5 knowledge, I went in and did the math, and a transfer was going to fall on my mom's birthday. So I just knew that was a sign. And so I called the clinic that day and said, please sign me up. I've started and I'm ready. And again, we were blessed. Everything with my blood work looked great. And, but yeah, went in and put a little baby girl in. Yeah, it was very sad, but also extremely beautiful. And again, in my estimation, really kind of a God thing. Because it made me feel okay with moving forward with what I knew would be something, potentially very exciting after something so heart-wrenching. But it felt like her hand was on the process.
This is what we're doing this for. We share stories about people trying to have babies all the time, but we actually don't spend much time talking about what these babies mean to these families. These are joyful moments in our lives that we get to live and experience, and they more than balance out the sorrow that we face. It's all connected together, a tapestry of people and experiences. That's what family is. And we heard Sarah thank her fertility doctor earlier in the story, but she wanted to give out one more thank you before we wrapped her story up today.
I have the pleasure of working for AT&T in a division for FirstNet, which is a government contract that AT&T executes on to build a network for first responders. And, it's a mission, and that we're on it to really empower public safety. And just like they're so dedicated to that mission, thank you for being dedicated to me as an employee. And making my dream of a family that much easier, while still being able to work every day hard for you. One item I didn't really talk about, but my first year at AT&T had been kind of rough, and I'd had a fabulous career prior at smaller companies, and I was really heavily considering it as being courted back by an old employer, and was definitely considering that. And that was just about the time that I had found out that about Progyny, about the fertility benefits, and that certainly swayed my decision to go ahead and stick it out and, not step back into my comfort zone, and to stay on the path that I was with AT&T. And I'm super grateful and blessed that I did. Again, I love my job. I love what I do. And I'm wildly grateful to AT&T for helping us have a family.
And I'm wildly grateful to Sarah for coming on our show today and sharing her experiences with all of us. It's stories like these that people need to hear. Someone out there is going through something just like this. So thank you, Sarah. I also want to thank Dr. Barrett Cowan for sharing his expertise about all things male infertility with us. If you want more of Dr. Cowan or just more fertility information in general, visit progyny.com/education or check out some videos on our YouTube channel. It's under the name Progyny. Of course, I want to thank AT&T for being such a wonderful employer that believes in transformative fertility and family-building coverage for their people. And finally, I want to thank you. Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, you should check out our Instagram at This Is Infertility Podcast. We also have recently launched a new Instagram channel with the @Progyny handle, so if you're interested in connecting with Progyny, I would go check that out as well. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progyny, smarter fertility benefits. Please remember this podcast is not intended to substitute for the personalized expert advice of your physician. I'm Dan Bulger, and this is Infertility.